Welcome to our spotlight video. I am Todd Schmidtetter. I am the rector at Holy Apostles Episcopal Church in Satellite Beach, and I am delighted to be with you and delighted that you joined us today. Um, just a couple things before we get into the actual content. If you would, please, it helps us out tremendously. If you would hit that thumbs up like button. Um, and if you're interested in subscribing to the channel, we would love for you to be a part of this community. So you hit that red subscribe button and you're in. Both cost you absolutely nothing, and they are very helpful for us as a community that's trying to grow. So again, if you wouldn't mind hitting that thumbs up like button and subscribing to the channel, we would very much appreciate it. With that out of the way, we're gonna jump right into the material today, and what we're looking at kind of today is we're looking at Luke chapter 12, verses 32 through 40. And this is a section where it starts off with Jesus addressing his disciples. And Jesus is going to say to his disciples, do not fear, or do not be afraid, or fear not. Whatever your translation is, one of those statements is most likely going to be the translation of your Bible. But they all have the same idea, and that's that the disciples are in some sort of circumstance where they're fearful. And Jesus' response to them, to the fear that they have, is do not be afraid. Now, this is not the only place in which you encounter Jesus telling his disciples not to be afraid. If you remember in the upper room after the crucifixion, the disciples are hiding out in the upper room, and Jesus comes into the upper room and he says, peace, do not be afraid, because their natural reaction is to be afraid. Well, one of the things that's interesting when you encounter this phrase or these ideas of Jesus saying, don't be afraid, is that he doesn't just say, don't be afraid, and then leaves it at that. That would, in some sense, be dismissive. That would, in some sense, minimize their very real emotions that they're going through as human beings. When Jesus says this, he gives a reason why they should not be afraid. And sometimes the reason is beforehand, so he'll give the reason, and then it's kind of like a, therefore, don't be afraid. Or in this case, Jesus will say, do not be afraid, and then he gives the reason why they should not be afraid. So when you encounter this, it's always with Jesus giving some context to why they should not be afraid. So when we're looking at our section for today, and we ask the question of, so why does Jesus say, do not be afraid? And Jesus tells us immediately after he says that, for my Father delights in preparing the kingdom for you. Or my Father delights in giving you the kingdom of heaven. Or, whatever the translation that you're using is, it all has the same idea that that eternity, that heaven, that the afterlife awaits us. And so, in the context of do not be afraid in the midst of the suffering or the pain or the struggle or the very real fear that you have in your real life that's going on right now, because an eternity with God awaits you, because heaven awaits us, because something beyond this world that is far glorious than our minds can comprehend awaits us. And so the context of this is that this suffering, this pain, this fear, this depression, whatever it is that we're going through in our life, is this moment. And what awaits us is an eternity in joy with God. So this is kind of the context of this. Now, I've preached on this topic probably more than any other topic that I've ever preached on. Since being at Holy Apostles. This has been something that I've preached on quite a bit. Now, the vast majority of my preaching on this topic has been at funerals. Probably 95% of my preaching on this topic is in the context of a funeral. And one of the things that's really interesting, when you preach this at a funeral, people will cry. When you begin walking them through this idea of the suffering of this life is momentary and compared to eternity with God, people will come up to you afterwards and they'll thank you for that message. People will hug you in a way that you've never been hugged before. People will embrace you as a way of thanking you for calming their heart. People will cling to that message. You can see them clinging to that message. You can see the hope in their eyes when you preach this message at a funeral. It's very different than when you preach this message on a normal Sunday morning. You wake up on a normal Sunday morning, let's just say that it's Pentecost 5, and you go in on Sunday morning and you preach this message, what you will see, it's the same message, identical message. You could take the same exact sermon and you can move that funeral sermon to a typical Sunday morning, and what you experienced at that funeral of people crying and hugging you and thanking you and seeing the hope in their eyes. You preach that same message on a typical Sunday morning and you will begin to see their eyes glaze over. You will see their minds start drifting off. You might even see people pulling out their grocery list and writing it down in the middle of the sermon. And after the service, you'll hear people say things like, I was really hoping for a practical sermon today. Or I was really hoping for something that would really touch what I'm going through in my life right now. You will see the boredom on their face when you preach this message on a typical Sunday morning. It's a very different context. A funeral will force you into a context where what you're preaching on is the reality of their life, is what they're actually going through. Whereas when you preach this on a typical Sunday, what you'll see is that this isn't what they're going through. And this doesn't seem relevant to them. And so one of the things that I was struck with this week, I'm not preaching on this on Sunday, but this is the reading for this Sunday, the gospel reading. This is Luke chapter 12, verses 32 through 40. Again, I'm not preaching on it, but I considered preaching on it. And as I considered preaching on it, I was just struck with how important this message is in any context. That you and I need to hear this message over and over and over again. That the greatest gift that you and I have ever been given is that we've been brought into Christ. And in being brought into Christ, all that is His has been given to us, including the kingdom of heaven. It is one of the most glorious things that could ever be preached on. And to some regard, it is sad that sometimes that message bores us. Sometimes that message is viewed as not practical. Sometimes that message causes us to fall asleep. Whereas in a very different context in our life, that message is the hope that we cling on to. And I think the truth of the matter is, for most things, I say the truth is in the middle. But in this, I think the truth is that this is a message that we should always cling on to. So even though I'm not preaching on it on Sunday, I still wanted to get a little word in on it throughout the week. So as we move closer and closer to Sunday, let's keep this in mind, that this is always a message worth hearing and worth taking in. That's all I got for you today. This is the Spotlight video. I missed being with you last week. Delighted to be with you this week, and I will be with you next week for another Spotlight video. I hope to see you at church on Sunday.